Members, this is the appointed time. We have a quorum. So I call the meeting to order. This is the meeting of the Finance Committee. The meeting is scheduled to adjourn at 5:30 today. If need be, I will extend the meeting by up to 15 minutes. And let me remind members, if you have direct or indirect pecuniary interest in relation to items discussed today, please disclose the nature of the interest before you speak according to Rule 83A of the Rules of Procedure. I also urge members to note the voting requirement when direct pecuniary interests are involved according to Rule 84 of the Rules of Procedure. Item 1. FCR 2025 paper number 53. Members are invited to endorse the recommendation of the Establishment Subcommittee made at the meeting of the 18th of March 2026 relating to EC 2025-2612. The paper recommends making permanent one time-limited directorate post in the Home Affairs Department to continue the work in deepening the reform of building management at D2, that's an AOSGC post, with effect from the 1st of April or with immediate effect upon approval of the FC, whichever is later. According to paragraph 3A of the FC procedures, as there is no recommendation from the Establishment Subcommittee to have a further discussion at the FC, nor have we received a joint petition by 3 members to ask for a further discussion, the FC will not further discuss this paper. I now put this paper to a vote. FCR 2025-26 paper number 53. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by the majority of members who have voted. I declare the proposal passed. Item 2. FCR bracket 2025-26 paper number 54. Members are invited to endorse the recommendation of the Establishment Committee made on the 18th of March 2026 in EC 2025-26 paper number 13 for the creation of 2 time-limited posts in the Financial Services branch of the FSTB, entailing 1, AOSGB, a D3 post, and 2, a Senior Principal Executive Officer, D2, for 8 months with effect from the 1st of April 2026 or upon approval by the Finance Committee, whichever is the later, until the 30th of November 2026 for organizing the APEC Finance Ministers meeting in October 2026. Same as the previous item, which has already been voted on. On the recommendation of the Establishment Subcommittee, the Finance Committee will not have a further discussion of this paper. I now put the paper to a vote. FCR 2025-26 paper 54. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think members who have voted, the majority of the members who have voted are in favor of the proposal. The proposal is passed. Item 3. FCR 2025-26 paper number 55. Members are invited to approve the creation of a new commitment of $4.066482 billion for the development of the territory-wide CCTV system under the Smart View program by the Hong Kong Police Force. The panel on security was consulted on the 24th of February 2026. The administration also provided 1 supplementary paper. Members, if you want to speak, please press the request to speak button. Let me remind members that after the Q&A session has come to an end, I will immediately put this paper to a vote. Will members please check the progress of this meeting and come back to this room for voting. And to answer members' questions, we are joined by the following officials. Mr. Michael Chuck, Under Secretary for Security. Ms. Vincy Chan, Principal Assistant Secretary for Security, Mr. Chan Chi-yong, Assistant Commissioner of Police Information Systems Wing, Mr. Wong Chi-wing, Chief Superintendent of Police Operations, Mr. Leonard Lam, Chief Systems Manager, IT Branch, Hong Kong Police Force, and Ms. Diana Chan, Chief Telecommunications Engineer, Communications Branch. I will ask Chair of the panel, Mr. Peter Shiu, to report on the key deliberations of the panel. Thank you. The panel on security discussed the funding proposal at the meeting of the 24th of February 2026. Members are in support of the launch of phases 2 and 3 of the Smart View program of the Hong Kong Police Force to expand the coverage of the territory-wide CCTV system on a sustained basis to enhance the crime prevention efficiency. Members have also agreed that the police should take the direct engagement in procurement approach to prevent geopolitical risks and to ensure the stability of the potential supply chain as well as information security of the CCTV system of the Smart View program. Members carefully scrutinize the estimated expenditure of the proposed program and implementation details. Members have also expressed concerns about the fees for hardware procurement and future maintenance. When circumstances permit, the police should strive to compress the relevant non-recurrent expenditure. Some members have also suggested expanding the CCTV coverage under Smart View program to rural areas and 3 new buildings, and priority should be given to these 2. Members have also raised concerns about protection of personal data privacy and personal data security. Members, the administration already responded to members' questions and concerns at the meeting. The panel does not object to further submitting this proposal to FC for examination. Thank you. 19 members are waiting to speak. Let me read out their names. In this order, here are the names of members: Chang Pui Kong, Chen Pui Leung, Mark Zhong, Brave Chan, Andrew Lam, Nixie Lam, Johnny Ng, Chao Su Chung, Reverend Peter Kun, Ronick Chan, Dennis Leung, Stephen Ho, Michael Ngai, Hui Lee, Duncan Chiu, Jodie Fogg, Alan Chan, Christine Fong, and Albert Zhang. I will give each member 4 minutes question and answer, starting with Mr. Zhang Puigong. Thank you, Chair. I support the Smart View program. Well, I think if possible, we should increase the number of cameras to protect the public. Second, according to the paper, the program's coverage will be expanded and the third-party CCTV cameras data will also be consolidated. As I understand, for my constituency, including the housing estates and other community facilities, the program will connect to their CCTV systems. So as I understand, you're applying for funds for this purpose. So about future maintenance, will the cost be taken up by the housing department or by your bureau? And for new housing estates, are they required to accommodate the installation of new cameras, and who will fund the cost? Is it that department or yours? Secretary. Well, I think the member asked a question on the third-party data. Now, basically, we receive the data from the third-party system. We are not related to the maintenance of their system, so they will be responsible for the maintenance of their own systems. But as I understand, there will be new cameras installed at these locations. and that you will have access to these new cameras. If the third party also wishes to have access to these new cameras, does it mean they need to pay extra for connecting to your system? There are two questions. So let's say if the third party operates its own system, we don't need to install cameras. We can just get data from them. About new cameras, we plan to install cameras only in public places and not on any private premises of any third party. Right, let me remind members that questions should focus on the sum that this proposal is applying for. I think Mr. Zhang just asked a question relating to the policy itself. Please make sure this is observed. Next, Mr. Chen Pui-Leung. Smart View program would enhance crime detection and prevention and maintain law and order, so I support that. My question is this. It relates to the financial implications. In paragraph 4 of the paper, upon completion of the first phase of the program, starting from the second phase, 20,000 cameras will be added annually, and 60,000 cameras are expected to cover the entire city in 2028. In the third phase, 6,500 more cameras will be added between 2028 and 2031. Now, in paragraph 18, I see some figures are listed. I want an explanation because in 3 years from 2026, 2027, 28, and 2028, 29, the relevant expenditures involved are roughly 240 million, 250 million, and 140 million. Starting from 2029-30 all the way to 2030-31, I see great fluctuations in the same figure, down to 50,000, etc. Now, I'd like to know the details. Let's say by 2028, there will be 60,000 additional cameras, and yet the expenditure only amounted to just about $10,000 per camera. That's 258 million. But can you thousand? But then for the subsequent 6,500 cameras, it would take 258 million. Can you explain why, since in the first phase the communications networks have been installed? It has to do with cash flow management. Now, in the initial stage of the works, we're not required to pay up. Upon completion in 2031, we'll be required to pay. So it has to do with cash management. And the follow-up question? No. Next, Mr. Mark Zhang. Thank you, Chair. A question on the dollar sign. Mr. Chen Pui-Leung already asked this question about the surge of expenditure in 2031-32. My next question relates to the function of the system, and that manpower savings will be achieved through adopting technology for crowd management, and that manpower can be redeployed. I mean, the recurrent expenditure on staff would amount to some 26 million, and yet manpower savings only reached some 19.7 million. So why is it that despite the savings, the ultimate figure is higher? As for the Transport Department's work, I understand that surveillance cameras will have to be installed on major roads. Now, there'll be funding applications from the Transport Department. My question is, their cameras will be connected to the Smart View program. And then will you be able to allow limited access of the data by other government departments for law enforcement, such as FEHD officers using the data to catch litter bugs and those who smoke in non-smoking areas? I think you're digressing, Mr. Mark Zhang.
No, that's still not strictly related to the issue. Yes. Well, with regard to recurrent expenditure, the reason why, comparatively speaking, we'd be saving less than the actual recurrent expenditure, because for the savings, it's a theoretical saving, and therefore we try to translate that into cash value. But then, when it comes to the Smart View program, you cannot assess it by way of the cash value, because the most important thing is about protecting public safety and public order, and it's about crime prevention. And if we can turn Hong Kong into a safe city whereby everybody will be able to move around in the city safely, then I think it's great value for money. But then what about NT Northwest near the cycling tracks? So there are a lot of people cycling illegally, and therefore if the CCTVs can be installed there, then that would also help. So you can choose to answer or not. Well, our priority is to install them in the crime black spots. With regard to the cycling track, there might be crimes taking place, and therefore we will take that into account. Next, Chen Yong. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Bureau Representative. Yes, I think at the security panel we already had a very detailed discussion, and I supported that. Well, if you look at the figures, I think if you look at para 36, the expected savings every year will be $19 million. I think that's good. And you also said that many of the new devices would be cheaper because they are newer, and therefore they can also be upgraded more easily. And therefore, I'd like to know that while you're using that in the terms of the contract, if you're not able to use up all the facilities right away, then when cheaper models come along, then you can also save further. Is that possible? Because that might be, calculated at a particular price right now, but then later on it might become cheaper. So can you achieve better saving in the future? Yes, very good comment. In fact, we're doing this by stages, and therefore, in fact, the longest would be 4 years ahead, and therefore, if prices fall, in fact, between 3 and 5 years, sometimes there would be a new generation coming up, and therefore, if we can achieve better savings, then we will definitely do that. Yes, Mr. Andrew Lam, 3 questions. First, I'd like to know, in terms of hardware and software and also communication network, these are about procurement of facilities, but then, well, a total of $4.06 billion will be spent. But then would that include, actual works, for example, the installation of lampposts and also the excavation of land and so on? So that's about site prep. Would that be counted as site preparation, or would it be covered or classified under another category? If yes, so can you give me the detailed breakdown? And next, communication network, it would account for some 1/3 of the total cost, so it's a very substantial portion. So I'd like to know it. There might be other technologies available. Why do you have to procure optical fiber network? Is it because of safety or security consideration? Is it necessary? And thirdly, is about contingency, because that would account for 5% of the total cost. Well, as far as I'm aware, for contingency for AB, hardware, software, and communication network, after procurement of those, you should be able to decide as to how much that would cost when it comes to contingency cost. But then for the rest, the fluctuation will not be very serious. In other words, for hardware, software, communication network, once a decision is taken to procure, then however stages you're going to make the payment or installments, that would not fluctuate anymore. And therefore, contingency will not change. Is that the case? Yes. First of all, for the entire project, non-recurrent expenditure, the biggest cost would be on the optical fiber network. So I can answer all the questions in one go. When it comes to the actual optical fiber network, it's not about procurement. It's also about installation. So the main cost would be incurred on installation. And therefore, you can see that, part of that would be attributed to installation. And then for the site preparation, basically, is about the logistics, for example, the equipment, store, and so on. And also, does it have to be connected to optical fiber? Because a lot of images will be transmitted, and therefore, we will have to ensure that the capacity is big enough, and also that would also have to be encrypted, and therefore we have to have a secure network for transmission. And of course we have the 5G and also the 6G network. Can that be done? But then when it comes to wireless transmission, we believe that optical fiber network would be more secure. And also for the 5% contingency cost, is about contingency situations, because very often it's about installation works, and therefore in certain cases some of the situations cannot be foreseen. Yes, can I make it simple? I understand that in work, when you carry out works, you have to prepare for contingency situations. But then for the hardware on the optical fiber network, for procurement, it's a very substantive cost. Once you sign the contract on the procurement, there would not be any further fluctuation. But then in terms of the installation and so on, there might be some volatility in terms of the cost. So I assume that for the 5%, once a decision is taken today on the procurement, you would already know exactly how much you are going to pay for the network, right? And therefore there shouldn't be any need for contingency for that. For procurement related hardware, software, and so on, indeed that cost can be very fixed, and therefore we don't expect that to exceed our forecast, because we have already done a lot of market research. But then second is about the installation. For the installation part, a lot of unforeseen circumstances might arise, and therefore for the contingency is mainly to cater for the installation phase. Miss Nixie Lam, yes, I support this. Page 5 on the non-recurrent expenditure for staff training. So that part fluctuates very seriously, because the spending initially might be more, but then when it comes to 20, 29, and 30, all of a sudden it dropped very substantially. But then by 20, 30, 31, it rose again. So I'd like to know why is that the case? Because I understand that you have already included police staff to be trained, and I think the number should be rather stable. So why is it that there is this volatility in terms of the cost in those years? Yes, mainly for this particular system, a lot of the frontline staff will be using that, in particular for those responsible for crime or criminal investigation, and also for crowd activities. We would also be using that, and therefore, with a 30,000 strong force, they cannot undergo training in one go, and therefore we will have to do it in phases, and also at different stages when the system is in operation. We will also need to have different number of staff undergoing training. So that's according to our plan. Any follow-up? Yes. As I said, I understand that initially more people will have to undergo training, and therefore the training cost will definitely be rather substantial. But then, as I said, by 29, 30, and 30, 31, so it dropped to 75, and then it went up to 112 again. So why the fluctuation? Why the sudden surge in 20, 30, 31? Because according to my understanding, when it comes to training, definitely at the start you will have to train up a large number of staff, but then afterwards the number should remain steady. So by the time when it develop into the next phase and next generation, once again you will have to train up more people. So that's what I try to understand. Is that the case? Well, in fact, that's just an estimate, and you're right in saying that during the first 3 years we try to make sure that majority of our officers will undergo training, and then for the remaining years that depends on the situation, because most people have already undergone training, and also during the first 3 years majority of our staff and also much of the system has been handed over already, and therefore the training model would also have to be slowed down a little bit. Next, Johnny Ng. Yes, I speak to support the proposal, but then I have a number of questions. First, on the storage facility, according to the paper, that would cost about 290 million. So why do you have to spend that much? And also, with that estimate, have you taken into account the huge demand for that rising drastically, because there has been a 3 times rise during the past 3 years. So have you updated that recently? Because for contingency, you may not be able to cater for that because you only have about $200 million. But then for the storage facility, well, that's the core of the system, because you will have to have everything stored in that location. And also for the AI toolbox, how much would that cost? And also after the toolbox is completed, can it be extended so that it can be exported to Belt and Road countries, so that you'll be able to make some revenue out of that as well? Yes, on the first question on the storage capacity and the relevant cost, so I'll ask Mr. Lam to help. Yes, Chairman. On the storage capacity, well, that depends on the need for video storage. For the self-built, that would be for storing for 30 days, and then for others, that will be stored for 7 days. So that's the origin of the estimate. Any follow-up? What about the price? Have you taken into account the fact that in recent 3 months, the price has gone up by more than 3 times? Well, for AI investigation or smart investigation and also direct engagement approach, we understand that the market is very volatile, and once approval is given to this proposal, then we will try to sign the contract as soon as possible in order to avoid for any further fluctuation in cost. Would there be a cost overrun? We don't see that happening right now. Next, Chao Xiu-chong. I'm concerned about several things. First, for non-recurrent expenditure, there are several paragraphs describing that. Well, para 22, you said there's some $900 million to hire staff, and they're responsible for the development of application system and so on, and also system installation and configuration. And also you'll be hiring IT professional staff who will be responsible for acceptance tests and so on and so forth. And then you also said that EMSD staff would also be doing site monitoring, supervision, and so on. And then police would also have the responsibility, and that would also cost some $30 million. You will have to prepare for the site, and you would also have to conduct acceptance tests and so on. So what about the responsibilities of these staff? Would there be any duplication of duties? Or in other words, do you have any possibility of reducing the duplication of responsibilities in order to achieve better savings? So have you considered that? And also, well, for example, the EMSD staff will be working with the police officers. So is there any chance that you can also rationalize the duties so that the EMSD can pick up more responsibilities in order to save the cost of the police? And secondly, for the $30 million to be incurred by the police force, well, the $30 million has not been covered by the $4 billion. So that would also be digested within the budget of the police force. Are you going to create time restricted supernumerary staff, or will you be redeploying your existing staff in order to do that? And also in the first phase, well, you have not come to this for dedicated funds. Well, that's absorbed by the police force internal resources in order to pay for the first stage of this project. And now you're asking for some $4 billion, and you're coming to the FC to ask for a dedicated fund. So why is that the case? Because is it that in the first phase you have not been able to cover everything, and that's the reason why you have to come again for a dedicated funding proposal? Well, in simple terms, for the several batches of staff, the nature of work would be different, because we do have to look at the different functionalities, and therefore there is no question of duplication of responsibilities. And secondly, the initial phase was a pilot program, and therefore the police force use is recurrent budget to cover that. And once we have come to the view that this is necessary, this is feasible, and this is the most cost-effective way of doing that. For example, how many cameras do we have to install, and how should we install them? So we have done several tests, and therefore we are now confident that we should be able to extend it to cover more ground. So instead of using the recurrent budget of the department, we will not be able to cope with that. And therefore, we have turned it into a dedicated funding proposal.
Chair, let me ask a follow-up question. That is about the $30 million of funding to be provided under the head of the police. Is it necessary to hire extra manpower? The answer is no. We will deploy existing manpower. Next, Reverend Peter Kuhn. I support the proposal in principle, Chairman, but I'm perplexed. I'd like to pick up on the question just asked about the $1.4 billion on the lane of optic fiber cables. According to the administration, optic fiber network is preferred for security. So we're talking about cameras capturing what happens in the streets. There won't be anything sensitive in particular. Is it all right to use third-party optic fiber network instead of laying your own cables? Because this entails $1.4 billion. If the data comprises mainly street view, I don't understand why you need your own network. Secretary. Indeed, like Reverend Peter Kuhn said, most of the time the cameras will be capturing scenes in the public. And yet, if we are to collect the data, we need to have regard to personal data privacy. So we believe the relevant security arrangements should be put in place. Or else it will be very embarrassing if a data breach happens to a government-run system. And we also have cameras to be installed near critical infrastructure. It's not suitable to use open or public networks. Well, what about encryptions whilst using public networks? I'm not trying to be difficult. I just think that $1.4 billion for laying cables are just too much. In theory, for banks, they won't set up their own networks. They would just use the same network with data encryption. So will you give it a thought just to save $1.4 billion? Any response from the Secretary? Well, we had the New Generation Communication System project previously, and we would have regard to the nature of the operation. We sometimes would rent the third-party systems for use. As for the data to be captured here, we believe it would be safer to have our own network. Mr. Ronick Chan. Enhancing the CCTV system would be quite crucial to ensuring law and order and stability in Hong Kong. So I support the Smart View program of the Hong Kong Police Force. I have two questions. Part of the funds will go to the installation of new cameras, and another part will go to connection to existing networks. Now, there is a big difference here. In short, if you install new cameras, it would be more costly. But you have not told us exactly how much per camera would be spent. Say, if the cost is low, and if you want to install new cameras in, say, rural areas in the new territories, it may be wiser to connect your program to the existing CCTV networks. So that's the first question about the difference between the two types of funds. The second point is, at the panel meeting, we talked about the non-recurrent expenditure, and the majority of the sum will be spent on the EMSD's operation. Members ask whether it's possible to drive down the cost. Have you gone back and discussed with the EMSD? Is there room to lower the cost? If the answer is in the negative, will you consider taking the approach of open tender so that another contractor can be engaged with lower cost than EMSD? To answer the first question about connecting to existing systems, indeed, when we install new cameras, we consider the locations of installation. Say if it's street side installation, it may involve $200,000 per one. If it involves installing the cameras on the bridges of highways, then it will be much more because it involves other public utilities. Now there is another sum set aside for connecting to existing systems. It's hard to tell the difference here because it depends on the actual locations. As for the EMSD, $90 million under the EMSD trading fund will be used on installation of cameras, testing, supervision. As for installation, it will be done on a reimbursement basis. So according to the EMSD, there is little room to further drive the cost down. Any follow-up questions? No? Mr. Dennis Lau. Chairman, I support this funding proposal submitted by the Hong Kong Police Force to a tune of $4.066 billion for the installation of CCTVs under the Smart View program. I'd like to ask questions in relation to the expenditure in paragraphs 18 and 29. I mean, I don't have questions on these two tables, but I do have a question on the cost-benefit analysis in the enclosure, because like the Undersecretary said, for manpower savings, in fact, the figure itself may not be an accurate sum. It's just a conversion in concept. And my first question is this: from 2028-29 all the way to 2036-37, the figure remains the same. That is 19740, and I think that the figure should come down year by year, starting from 2028-29, and that is by 2029-30, the figure should come down to zero. In theory, that should be the case. Second question, for non-recurrent expenditure, since savings are achieved, I don't think you should lump it with the recurrent expenditure for the purpose of the cost-benefit analysis, because you need to compare the recurrent expenditure year on year before you get an accurate sum of reduction. So from this accountancy point of view, I'd say that there is a problem here. Either it's misleading or that you don't know the difference. So I don't think you should put everything in just one table. This is quite misleading. Undersecretary. Thank you, member, for your comment. Now, for all the FC papers issued by the administration, including the tables in the enclosure, we follow the government's accounting standards. As for the expenditure to be saved or cost savings, again, we follow the relevant guidelines. There are spots not covered by the CCTV, and manpower is still required. So it's not inaccurate to say that the manpower savings could be used to support the spots not covered by the CCTVs. Mr. Denzel, are you referring to the enclosure in FCR 2025-26, paper number 55? Because from 2028-29 to 2036-37, the total savings have remained the same, 19740. That is why I'm asking whether it's a cumulative saving or is it that annually you're able to save the same amount. Because if this amount is saved, then in the following year it should not be included here. Any further response? Undersecretary? No. Ms. Jodie Fogg. One crime is too much, Chairman. So I support leveraging technology to combat crime. Phases 2 and 3 of Smart View program seeks to further expand the territory-wide CCTV system. I support the proposal, but I'd like to add 2 concerns. According to the paper, $353 million will be spent on procuring software, $160 million of which will be spent on AI-related software. That's about 4%. AI technology is developing very rapidly. What you procure today may be so out of date a few years down the road. So, what if new AI technologies emerge in the future? Will the administration apply for funding again for a system upgrade? Or is it that flexibility is preserved in this application? For example, will you impose terms and conditions to require contractors to provide system upgrade or software upgrades during the maintenance period? My next question is this. $4 billion for this funding proposal is definitely not a small number. The public do have high hopes in terms of expediting crime prevention and detection. So if funding is approved for the launch of the 2nd and the 3rd phase of SmartView program, will the administration conduct a midterm review to gauge the effectiveness in terms of the dropping of crime rates as well as increase in detection rate? Well, we have 3 new buildings in the community. They are generally not covered by CCTV cameras. So out of the $4 billion funding, will there be a portion set aside to provide technical support or subsidy the community? Ms. Kwok, I don't think the second question relates to this funding proposal. Now, Secretary, perhaps you answer the first one, and you may answer the second one if you like. About $169 million on AI-related software. We understand that technologies are developing in leaps and bounds. It is important when it comes to AI that daily training is provided, and our colleagues are involved in training the AI models. Now, regarding the current system, we're actually using AI on 2 fronts. License plate identification and crowd management. AI is used to assess the size of crowds, and we'll continue to use AI for, say, facial recognition and also identification of objects. For example, whether somebody is holding a knife, whether 2 people are actually engaged in a fight. We need to train AI to do that. As for the contract, the contractor will be required to provide system maintenance and upgrade for a period of 10 years. So at least 10 years with upgrades included. The second point is about the effectiveness of CCTV in helping us assess the overall situation in Hong Kong. Now, I'd like to stress that the police commissioner reports to this council the law and order situation in Hong Kong every year, and this year he also briefed members on the SmartView program. We also have a half-yearly review, and we report the progress to members as well, and by then the report will be given to members as well. Next, Mr. Alan Chan. Thank you, Chair. I give my full support to the use of AI in the identification process. AI should replace humans to help save costs. However, recently I came across software developers relating to AI. Well, everything is on the cloud. We no longer require a proper communication network. But this one entails $1.3 billion and is really perplexing. In fact, for the 20 airports in our country, 16 of them are already using this system. And in Haiding district in Beijing, the whole district is covered by CCTV cameras with very low cost. So I agree that AI should be deployed. But then, since you're not going to have tendering, you are instead going to have direct procurement. I want to make sure that you can engage the right contractor. will you make reference to the advanced technologies adopted in the mainland? If it's not stored on the cloud, I'd like the police to explain the logic.
Undersecretary, well, some asked about why we have opted for optical fiber instead of cloud services and so on. Well, in fact, the purpose is that once we get the images and video clips, we will have to store it in our own cloud for internal reference. So in determining which technology to go for, actually we will have to consider it from security's perspective. Any follow-up? Well, my follow-up is I can see that there are contractors providing these services and so on. So have you discussed with mainland service providers to see if they have such services available? Because I think most mainland airports are using the same contractor in providing the services. So you're asking if they have considered alternative contractors who can provide cheaper services. Yes, given the very comprehensive services available on the mainland, have you not considered that as an option? Because you're talking about single tender and direct engagement. Well, let me put it this way. We conducted market research and we approached companies with potential. We asked them to comply with national security requirements, and once they fulfill those requirements, then we will screen them in. And then for others who have not been able to meet the requirements, then they will be screened out. And definitely for mainland contractors, they have been taken into consideration as well. I think for members who are elsewhere in the complex, we have 3 more members to speak before we put this to the vote, and therefore, if you like to ask questions, then please come back as soon as possible. Next, Christine Fong. Thank you. Thank you for explaining to us the details of the Smart View program. Well, some 5,000 cameras or 6,000 cameras will be installed in 2026. So 5,000 already were installed, and coming up in the coming financial years, you're going to install some 20,000 more within the next financial year under the budget of $4 billion. I can see that in the rural areas in the new territories, in particular near the villages and also in the hidden areas like at the exit of the toilets and so on, apparently very few have been installed. So I'd like to know, well, for the communication network, according to the paper, well, you have already spent some $1.3 billion in laying the network or installing the network in the rural areas. How many of them are in the new territories? And also, let's say if you're laying the optical fiber, if there are some problems, do you have fallback options? And also, you talk about installing that on cantilever, on highways and so on. So you talk about being able to identify the car plates and so on. That would also be very good in terms of law and order surveillance and so on. So I hope that more can be done. And also in densely populated residential areas, very often we have objects dropped from heights, and also the throwing of cigarette ends and so on. Well, once again, the second part of your question has nothing to do with financial arrangement. But what about the software costs? Would that also cover that function? So you're talking about some $350 million. Undersecretary, well, thank you for your question. Well, we are doing that in stages. So that would depend on the need of the time. And if we are of the view that there is a need for us to have CCTVs installed on certain areas in order to monitor the surrounding environment, well, in the next stage, some 6,000, and we have also taken into account the need of the northern metropolis, and therefore, how many will be located in the urban areas, how many will be in the rural areas. In fact, there aren't that many rural areas these days, because many of the so-called rural areas have already been urbanized. And also, we talk about the cameras and their functions. Well, of course, we can also consider inserting different functions into the camera. But then what's the purpose? If it's just for crime prevention, we do not necessarily have to have a certain function. And if we're to monitor whether or not there are objects thrown from height, then we would not be monitoring the ground, and therefore that might be different from the original intention of installing the camera. Next, Albert Chong. Yes, I personally support this because in the mainland Singapore and in the UK, in public areas, they have already installed CCTVs to help with law enforcement. I think it's a very common practice internationally. And also in the first phase, that has already assisted the police in detecting certain crimes, including murder and so on. So we can see that it's very effective. I'm also concerned about the security of the system. I'm concerned whether or not there are sufficient resources to ensure that the entire Smart View program is fully protected. So have you set aside resources to prevent the system from being hacked? For example, the servers, the database, and also the computer system. So have you got reserve funds for emergency situations? Thank you. First of all, well, it's not just the police force. The entire government is also very concerned about information security, and therefore, normally we have two directions to take. First is about the protection of the physical hardware, for example, in the server room, and also where they are installed in the buildings. The security of the buildings will also be important, and also management of the system, and also whether or not is connected to the internet, and whether or not there are firewalls to prevent the system from being hacked. So that's our day-to-day work. So we do not have a separate item to look into this because that has been covered in our day-to-day recurrent expenditure. Next, Mr. Webster. Sorry, it should be Mr. Holden Chow. He's not here, so Mr. Webster, I support this. I have two questions for clarification. Para 38 rather. You talk about the different stages of payment and also the milestone days, because it covers from 2027 to all the way to 2031, 32. So we talk about the target completion days. So once you have completed a certain milestone, then you have to make payment. So what if there is any delay? So would that be carried forward to the next phase, and therefore the payment would also be adapted accordingly? And then it's about the recurrent expenditure, because as I can see here, it's a long-term commitment, because the paper spans from 2036-37. The annual recurrent expenditure has been fixed at about $243 million. So has the government conducted any assessment for this long-term commitment? Would that have any bearing on our future budget or future account or balance? Well, in terms of the implementation timetable and also the performance target, that has been clearly stated in the contract, and if the supplier fails to meet the terms of the contract, that there would also be penalties. And also, we will of course not be paying if they are not able to meet the target. And also for 2035-36 onwards, the recurrent expenditure, by 2036 we will have 60,000 cameras, and also for the infrastructure of the entire network will also have to be repaired and maintained, and therefore the most expensive part would be on hardware maintenance. In other words, for these cameras that have been installed, there would be wear and tear, and therefore they will have to be replaced. So that's absolutely necessary. Next, Mr. Jonathan Lamport. Yes, I support the police proposal for the installation of the Smart View program. That's to protect the public and also the business sector. It plays a key role. I have a question for the Undersecretary. I understand that some $26 million recurrent expenditure would be used for hiring contract staff to repair and maintain the system. Well, given the fact that it's already an infrastructure facility for the police force, have you considered the management of the core management ability of the hardware and software can be transferred to the police force in order to ensure the long-term confidentiality of the system and also security of the system? Thank you. Under Secretary. Well, for the contract staff, that will have to be higher. In fact, this is a new program, and therefore we need to have people to manage the program, and that's the reason why we have to hire contract staff. If they were to be converted into the permanent establishment, then we would need to create new posts for the purpose. So that might not be the most cost-effective way of doing things, because the IT sector would be evolving very rapidly, and when there is a generation change, then we believe that hiring contract staff would be the most appropriate way of doing things. Okay, if there are no further members who would like to speak, then I will put this to the vote. FCL 2025 to 2655 will be put to the vote. Will those in favor please raise your hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I believe that for those who have taken part in the voting, majority of them are in favor, and therefore the proposal is approved. So between the 13th and the 17th of April, we're going to have special FC meeting to consider the budget for the year. So please mark that down in the calendar. So I declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you.